Under the broken skies of a forgotten colony world, a man named Jarek moved through the endless rows of discarded machines and shattered hulls that made up the great junkyard where he lived and worked. He had grown used to silence, the quiet of abandoned metal groaning in the wind and the occasional shriek of scavenger birds that nested in hollow starship engines. His life was one of repairing what others threw away, of finding value where the galaxy saw only waste. On that particular night, as the twin moons cast pale light across the rusting wrecks, Jarek felt something different in the air, a tension that did not belong to old iron or corroded fuel lines. It was the sound of breathing, ragged and desperate, echoing faintly from behind a pile of broken shuttle wings. Jarek was cautious, for the junkyard was not a place for children or wanderers, and anything alive among the heaps of discarded ships was either lost or dangerous. He stepped quietly with a small lantern in his hand, the light cutting a path between heaps of metal. The sound grew louder, trembling gasps as if someone was fighting to hold on to life itself. When he turned the corner, he saw her. A small figure crouched in the shadows, thin limbs trembling, her face half hidden behind matted dark hair. Her eyes lifted toward him and glowed faintly red like embers trapped in a dying fire. Fangs flashed for only a moment before she covered her mouth with her hands as if ashamed. At first, Jarek thought she might be some wild animal or mutant, but then he noticed she was only a girl, younger than 20 by human measure, though clearly not human. She was rail-thin, her clothes shredded, her skin pale with veins that seemed to pulse faintly beneath the surface. Jarek had heard of such creatures in tales whispered by spacers, a race of vampire aliens feared and despised, said to feed on blood and bring madness with their presence. Yet here she was, starving, shaking, her gaze not filled with malice but with hunger and terror. She tried to crawl backward among the scrap as if expecting him to strike her or call for the enforcers, but Jarek only knelt slowly and placed the lantern down. He pulled a ration pack from his coat, the kind he ate every day, dull protein but nourishing enough. He opened it and pushed it toward her. The girl hesitated, her eyes narrowing. But the smell of food was too much and she lunged forward to take it, devouring every bite as if she had not eaten for weeks. Jarek watched quietly, noticing the way her hands trembled with every movement, the way she tried to keep her fangs hidden even as she chewed. When she finished, she looked at him with wide eyes, unsure if he would now demand something in return. Instead, Jarek simply asked her name. Her voice cracked as she whispered, calling herself Lyra. She said it with such weakness that he doubted anyone had spoken her name in a long time. He asked where she had come from, and her expression darkened. She muttered about hunters and betrayal, about a clan that cast her aside because she was weak, because she could not take lives to feed as they demanded. They had left her in the junkyard like trash, certain she would wither away unseen. The words stirred something inside Jarek. He had lived his life picking up scraps others discarded, turning broken machines into working tools again. Now in front of him sat a living being thrown away by her own kind. He felt the weight of that cruelty and something hardened in him. The galaxy had rules, but sometimes rules deserved to be broken. He brought her back to his small shelter at the edge of the yard, a shack built from starship plating and patched with cloth. He lit a small heater and gave her water. Lyra curled up in a corner as if expecting him to change his mind and drive her away. Yet when morning came, she was still there, staring at him with those glowing eyes that seemed less dangerous now and more like a plea for trust. Jarek knew hiding her would bring trouble. The council despised her kind, and any neighbor who discovered her would call in soldiers without hesitation. But as he looked at the girl who had been left to die, he decided the risk was worth it. The junkyard had always been a graveyard of machines, yet maybe it could become the place where something new began. That first night when he found her among the rusting wrecks was the beginning of a bond neither of them could foresee, a bond that would change not just their lives but echo across the stars. For in the shadows of discarded ships, a starving vampire alien girl had found not just food, but the first glimpse of humanity's stubborn compassion, and Jarek had no idea what she would one day become. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty, yet also with a strange rhythm that Jarek had not known before. Lyra remained in his shack, keeping to the shadows during the daylight hours and venturing out at night to breathe the cold air that drifted over the piles of wreckage. She was stronger now that she had eaten, but her weakness was still clear. She would stumble when she tried to walk for long, and her eyes seemed constantly searching for something she could not name. Jarek noticed how she avoided the workers who occasionally came near the junkyard, and how she flinched at the sound of heavy boots crunching on gravel as if expecting hunters to appear. From the darkness one evening while Jarek was repairing a broken generator, Lyra came to him and spoke in a low voice. She confessed that food alone would not be enough. Her kind needed blood to survive, and though she had resisted for as long as she could, the hunger inside her was growing unbearable. She feared that one night she might lose control and attack him. Her voice shook as she said it, and Jarek could see the shame burning in her eyes. He understood then that the galaxy had labeled her people as monsters. Not because they lacked feeling, but because their nature demanded what others feared. He thought carefully and then told her that he would not abandon her. They would find a way. Jarek was not wealthy and he had no livestock to offer, but he remembered that in the outer colony markets, animal blood was sometimes sold for medicine and strange rituals. The next day he made a long journey to a nearby settlement and returned with sealed containers of preserved animal blood. When he offered it to Lyra, she hesitated, almost in tears, because no one had ever cared enough to help her in this way. She drank carefully, forcing herself not to consume too much, and afterward she looked calmer, her movement steadier, her eyes less wild. For the first time she smiled, a small fragile smile that made her look less like a creature of nightmare and more like a frightened girl who had finally been given a chance to live. In the evenings, Jarek began asking her questions about her people. Lyra spoke reluctantly at first, but over time she told him stories of her clan, of how strength was measured only in how much one could take from others, of how the weak were considered useless. She had refused to kill when they demanded it, and so they branded her broken and cast her away. Jarek listened in silence, his heart heavy with anger at the cruelty she had endured. He told her that among humans, weakness was not always a curse, that survival often came from helping each other rather than tearing one another apart. She listened intently as if his words were a language she had never heard before. Their nights became lessons. Jarek showed her how to repair scraps of machinery, how to use simple tools, how to see value in what others threw away. Lyra was quick to learn, and her strange senses gave her advantages he had not expected. She could hear the faintest vibrations inside metal, could tell when a circuit was on the verge of failure, could even feel the hum of energy through wires. Jarek began to realize that her nature was not just about hunger, but also about connection to life and energy itself. She was different, yes, but she was not useless or cursed. She was something rare, but the junkyard was never truly silent. One night Lyra froze suddenly, her head lifting, eyes wide. She whispered that someone was watching them. Jarek scanned the heaps of scrap and for a moment saw nothing. Then a glint of light reflected from a distant ridge. Whoever it was disappeared quickly into the shadows, but the fear in Lyra's eyes told him she recognized the presence. The hunters who had abandoned her might have returned to make sure their problem was finished. From that moment, the quiet companionship they had built carried an edge of danger. Jarek began keeping old weapons close at hand. A plasma cutter that could double as a blade and a pulse pistol he had repaired years ago. Lyra practiced moving silently among the wrecks, sharpening her speed though her body was still recovering. They both knew it was only a matter of time before someone came again, and when they did, the junkyard would no longer be a hiding place but a battlefield. In the darkness of the scrapyard where forgotten machines lay silent and cold, a strange partnership was forming between a human who believed in mending what was broken and an alien girl who had been told she was nothing but broken herself. The galaxy outside would never understand, but within the walls of rust and wreckage they were preparing for whatever was coming, bound together by hunger, compassion, and the first fragile threads of trust. The junkyard was no longer just a place of rusting ships and forgotten parts. It had become a training ground where Jarek and Lyra tested limits neither of them fully understood. Every morning, Jarek would rise before the sun and begin working on the piles of scrap, searching for usable pieces while Lyra shadowed his steps, watching, learning, and sometimes startling him with insights that no ordinary mechanic could have. She could run her fingers along a shattered engine coil and tell him which fragment still held a spark of power. She could tilt her head and hear the hum of energy buried deep inside layers of broken plating. And when she closed her eyes, Jarek swore she could almost feel the memory of a machine as if it were alive. Jarek knew that knowledge alone would not be enough to protect her if hunters returned. So he began teaching her how to defend herself. He showed her how to use a wrench as a weapon, how to swing it with control rather than wild rage, and how to move with her speed rather than against it. Lyra was quick to learn, but she often hesitated, afraid of what might happen if she lost control. She remembered too clearly the hunger that had once nearly consumed her, the frenzy that her kind feared as much as outsiders did. Jarek would stand firm, reminding her that she was not alone now, that she had a choice, and choices made her stronger than instinct ever could. In the evenings, they worked together on broken drones and discarded training bots, turning them into sparring partners. At first, Lyra struggled, her movements clumsy, her strength uneven, but as days passed, she began to flow like liquid shadow across the junkyard floor. She could leap from one heap of scrap to another with unnatural grace, landing silently, her crimson eyes locked on her target. Jarek watched her and could not help but feel awe, for she was not just surviving, she was transforming. One night while they sat by the dim glow of the heater, Lyra asked him why he was helping her. Jarek thought for a long time before answering. He told her that all his life he had been surrounded by things others had deemed worthless, machines abandoned because they no longer functioned, metal tossed aside because it carried too many scars. He said he had built a life out of proving that nothing was truly worthless if someone cared enough to fix it. She listened intently, and for the first time she leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder as if trusting that he would not push her away. The bond between them grew stronger, but so did the whispers outside the yard. Traders spoke of a human who was hiding something dangerous, of glowing eyes glimpsed in the night, of strange sounds drifting across the piles of wreckage. Jarek heard the rumors whenever he went into town for supplies. He noticed the looks that lingered too long, the questions asked with too much weight. Lyra noticed too and asked if he was afraid. He admitted that he was, but he also said fear was only weakness if it stopped you from acting. Courage, he told her, was nothing more than moving forward despite the fear. Lyra began testing her abilities further. She discovered that her senses extended beyond sound and sight. She could feel the pulse of living beings even through walls of steel. She could tell when Jarek's heart quickened in moments of danger, and she could sense when other presences crept too close to the junkyard's edge. One night she warned Jarek before the intruders even appeared. A small group of scavengers had slipped inside hoping to steal from him, but when they caught sight of her silhouette leaping silently from a broken starship hull, eyes glowing like fire in the night, they fled in terror without even attempting a fight. That incident gave Jarek a realization. The galaxy might see Lyra as a threat, but that very fear could be turned into protection. He told her that sometimes survival was not about hiding, but about making others think twice before daring to strike. She nodded slowly, understanding that the strength she had once feared might now become her shield. Still, danger loomed closer with each passing night. Lyra confided that she had felt the same presence again, the scent of those who had abandoned her, the hunters who would not rest until she was gone. She swore she would not run this time, and Jarek placed his hand on her shoulder, promising that neither would he. Among the graveyard of discarded machines, a girl once abandoned as worthless was learning to fight, to think, and to believe in herself. A man who had lived his life repairing scraps was beginning to see that perhaps fate had delivered him not just another broken thing to mend, but a being who would change everything. The junkyard was no longer a place of endings, but the forge of something new, and both of them knew the moment of testing was drawing near. The night of the first clash came without warning, though both Jarek and Lyra had felt its approach for days. The air in the junkyard carried a weight that pressed on their lungs, and every shadow seemed sharper than usual. Lyra moved restlessly across the heaps of scrap, sensing vibrations too faint for Jarek to detect. She stopped suddenly, her crimson eyes narrowing, and whispered that they were here. Jarek tightened his grip on the pulse pistol he had hidden beneath his coat and glanced toward the horizon where faint shapes began to emerge against the glow of the moons. The hunters were not ordinary scavengers this time. They moved with discipline, their armor dark and sleek, their weapons charged with a quiet hum. At least a dozen of them spread out in a line, advancing through the outer piles of wreckage. Jarek realized they were trained to kill, mercenaries or perhaps enforcers hired by the clan that had abandoned Lyra. His heart hammered in his chest, but when he looked at Lyra, he saw no fear, only resolve, though her body trembled as she fought to control the hunger rising inside her. Jarek whispered for her to remember his words, to remember that strength without choice was nothing but chaos. Lyra nodded once and crouched low, her movements silent as she melted into the dark. The hunters did not see her until she struck. With speed that blurred the air, she leapt from the top of a broken freighter hull and landed among them. Her hands lashed out with claws that were not entirely physical, tearing through armor with ease. 2 hunters fell before the others even raised their weapons. The rest opened fire, but their shots went wild as Lyra darted between them faster than sight could follow. Her fangs flashed, and for a moment, she looked like the very monster they had been told to expect. Jarek feared she would lose herself in the frenzy, but then she hesitated just long enough to glance back at him. That single look steadied her. Instead of draining the fallen, she shoved them aside and focused on disarming the rest. She ripped weapons from their hands, broke visors with swift strikes, and sent bodies tumbling into the heaps of junk. Jarek did his part as well, firing bursts from his pistol to cover her and using the plasma cutter to slash at any who came too close. The junkyard itself seemed to fight with them, piles of scrap shifting underfoot, loose wires sparking when struck by stray shots, and broken drones springing to life from old circuits jolted awake by energy fire. Lyra moved through it all with increasing confidence, her eyes glowing brighter, her voice rising in a fierce cry that echoed across the yard. Within minutes, the ground was littered with defeated hunters. Some groaned in pain, others lay still, and the rest fled into the night. Lyra stood among them, breathing hard, her clothes torn and her face streaked with blood that was not her own. Jarek approached cautiously, fearing she might still be lost to the frenzy, but when she looked at him, her eyes were clear. She whispered that she had not fed, that she had chosen restraint, and there was both pride and relief in her voice. The victory was not without consequence. The junkyard was scarred, their shelter partly destroyed, and the bodies would draw attention. Word would spread quickly that a vampire alien and a human mechanic had stood together against trained hunters. Jarek knew the council would hear of it soon, and when they did, they would not remain silent. He looked at Lyra and saw how she straightened her posture, how her gaze was no longer that of a starving child, but of a fighter who had discovered her will. As dawn began to break over the horizon, Jarek and Lyra worked to drag the bodies away and hide what evidence they could, though both knew it was futile. The galaxy was vast, but its ears were sharp, and now it would turn its gaze upon a forgotten junkyard where something unexpected had risen. In the quiet that followed, Jarek asked her how she felt. Lyra answered that she was no longer only what her clan had called her. She had seen that she could fight without losing herself, that she could wield her strength without becoming the monster they feared. For the first time, she believed she could be something different. Jarek placed a hand on her shoulder and told her that she was proof of what humanity had always known, that even in the darkest places, life could be reshaped. The junkyard returned to silence, but it was not the silence of abandonment any longer. It was the silence before a storm that would sweep across the stars once the council learned that a human had taken in a vampire alien girl, and together they had defied death itself. The days after the battle were filled with rebuilding and revelation. Jarek patched the walls of their shelter using starship plating, while Lyra moved through the wreckage searching for materials with uncanny precision. She seemed to feel which scraps still carried hidden strength, pulling out fragments of alloy that Jarek would have ignored and handing them to him with certainty. As they worked together, he noticed that she no longer moved like a frightened exile, but like someone beginning to claim her place in the world. Her steps were steady, her voice firm, and her crimson eyes shone not just with hunger, but with determination. One evening, as they sorted through the shattered carcass of an old warship, Lyra pressed her hand to a dead console. Sparks leapt where her fingers touched, and the console flickered weakly as though remembering life. Jarek froze, staring in disbelief, while Lyra gasped and pulled back. She confessed she had felt something like a current running through her veins, and the broken machine had responded. Curious, she tried again with another system. This time the wreck hummed faintly, and a panel of lights glowed for the first time in decades. Jarek realized then that her hunger for energy was not limited to blood. She could draw from machines themselves and in turn breathe life back into them. This discovery changed everything. Instead of hiding in the shadows, they began working openly within the junkyard. Jarek guided her with his knowledge of engineering while she fed power into broken circuits, reviving systems that had been dead since wars long past. Together they restored a fleet of drones, not as weapons, but as helpers to carry supplies and build shelters. The junkyard came alive under their hands, shifting from a graveyard into something like a growing city. But the centerpiece of their efforts was the derelict warship. Its hull was cracked, engines gutted, and bridge destroyed. Yet Lyra insisted it still had a heart. Night after night she poured her energy into the ship while Jarek worked to weld plating, reroute conduits, and rebuild controls. Slowly the vessel began to awaken, its dark interior lit by pulsing crimson light that echoed the glow of Lyra's own eyes. The first time its engines roared weakly to life, the ground beneath them trembled and both of them knew they were forging something powerful. Lyra's body changed as she pushed her limits. Her once frail form grew stronger, her movements sharper, her senses keener. She began to radiate an aura that unsettled even Jarek, a presence that demanded respect. Yet despite the growing power within her, she still sought his guidance, still listened to his stories of human persistence, of how humanity had always thrived, by lifting one another rather than casting the weak aside. She carried those words with her and whispered them to herself when the hunger threatened to drag her into darkness. News traveled faster than they could contain it. Traders and scavengers spoke of strange lights rising from the junkyard, of drones patrolling the skies, of a warship stirring among the ruins. Rumors reached beyond the colony, twisting into tales of a vampire queen building an army in the shadows. The Galactic Council grew uneasy, and the alien clan that had once discarded Lyra began to panic. They had sought to erase her, but now the galaxy spoke her name as if she were a storm on the horizon. Jarek warned her that the attention would bring danger greater than any hunters. Fleets would come, armies would descend, and the Council would not tolerate the existence of something they feared. Lyra did not flinch. She stood before the half-restored warship and declared that she would not hide again. She had been abandoned once and survived. Now she would rise not as prey but as protector. Jarek felt pride swell in his chest as he realized she was no longer the starving girl he had found, but a force taking shape before his eyes. That night, the warship fully awakened, its hull glowing with crimson energy veins, its engines thundering across the scrapyard. From the bridge, Lyra looked down at Jarek and spoke words that carried both promise and warning. She said she would defend him and all who stood beside him, but those who came to destroy them would learn fear greater than they had ever imagined. Jarek looked up at her and understood that the galaxy was on the verge of something it had never seen. The birth of a being who was neither monster nor victim, but a new kind of legend. The junkyard that had once been forgotten was now the cradle of transformation. Lyra had changed from starving exile into a warrior with the power of life and death at her fingertips. Jarek knew the Council would come soon, but he also knew they would not find what they expected. They would come seeking a broken girl, and instead they would face the beginning of a storm that would shake the stars themselves. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of preparation and revelation. Lyra and Jarek worked tirelessly among the resurrected fleet of drones and the awakened warship, while the scrapyard transformed into a fortress of strange machines and radiant energy conduits. Lyra had begun to experiment with her powers further, drawing energy not only from machines but from the very environment around her. She could feel the magnetic fields of the scrapyard responding to her presence and the old engines. The fallen ships thrummed in recognition of her will. It was as if the broken technology remembered her touch and her hunger had become a tool rather than a curse. Jarek observed her with a mixture of awe and concern. He knew her strength was growing, at an alarming rate. Yet he also saw that the girl he had rescued was no longer the same child. She was becoming something the galaxy had never seen, a hybrid of human ingenuity and alien predatory instinct. One evening, as they calibrated the drones, she paused and looked at the horizon. The sky above the junkyard was a deep violet streaked with orange from the setting suns, and in that moment she felt an unfamiliar stirring in her chest, a longing not for survival or sustenance, but for recognition. She asked Jarek if they would ever be accepted by the galaxy, if they would be allowed to exist without fear of annihilation. He shook his head gently, and told her that acceptance was not something the galaxy freely gave. It was earned through courage and the ability to face enemies without flinching. Lyra listened and nodded. Her eyes glowed faintly as she absorbed his words and made a silent vow that she would show the universe that she was not a creature to be pitied or hunted, but a being capable of reshaping the stars themselves. The first confrontation came sooner than expected. A scouting vessel of the Council appeared above the junkyard, its hull gleaming and weapons charged. The Council had heard whispers of her resurrection of the warship and drones, and they wanted to see the threat for themselves. Lyra and Jarek watched from the bridge as the vessel descended. Jarek tried to prepare her for diplomacy, but Lyra had little patience for words. She activated the warship and sent a pulse of energy across the fleet of drones, which responded instantly, forming defensive formations. The Council ship fired first, and the battle erupted in a storm of energy beams and mechanical roars. Lyra moved through the warship with grace and precision, her hands glowing as she channeled power into the engines and weapons. The drones reacted to her commands with almost sentient awareness, striking with perfect timing. Despite the chaos, she felt a strange exhilaration. Each shot fired, each evasive maneuver seemed to strengthen her rather than weaken. Her hunger pulsed, but no longer as a desperate need. Instead, it was a rhythm she could control and use to enhance her power. The Council underestimated her. She had not only revived a fleet, she had transformed herself into a force that the galaxy would have to reckon with. The first wave of Council drones was destroyed, and the vessel itself shuddered under the strain of her relentless assault. After the battle, the junkyard was silent once more. The remnants of the Council ship floated among the debris like broken monuments. Lyra stepped onto the deck of the warship and surveyed the wreckage around her. She realized that the galaxy would not forget her or Jarek, and that their existence would now inspire both fear and awe. She turned to Jarek, and he saw pride, and something deeper in her expression, a confidence born from survival and mastery of her own destiny. In the following days, Lyra expanded her influence. She repaired more ships, more drones, and began experimenting with combining human and alien technology in ways that even Jarek had not imagined. Her powers continued to evolve. She could sense incoming threats before they arrived and manipulate. Energy flows across the scrapyard at will. The legend of the vampire girl who had risen from hunger to command a fleet began to spread through whispers across nearby colonies. The Council sent more emissaries to assess the situation, and each time they were met with the same result, awe mixed with terror. Lyra was no longer the girl they had discarded. She had become something entirely new, a being who could tip the balance of power in the galaxy without hesitation. Jarek watched her one night. As she stood on the bridge looking at the stars, she had become a symbol of resilience and transformation, the living proof that even the most abandoned could rise to power beyond imagination. He knew the final test was yet to come, and that the Council would not stop until they fully understood what they were dealing with. But for the first time, he felt certain that they were ready. Lyra had become a force that would not be ignored, and the galaxy had only begun to glimpse the storm that was rising from the heart of the junkyard. The galaxy held its breath as word of Lyra's rise spread like wildfire across systems that had long considered humanity weak and insignificant. The Council could no longer dismiss the reports of a single girl commanding a resurrected fleet of warships and drones and wielding powers that defied comprehension. Each new transmission spoke of devastation wrought with precision and restraint, a power that struck fear, not because it sought destruction, but because it demonstrated absolute control. The emissaries that arrived to negotiate or intimidate returned with tales of a girl whose eyes glowed with alien fire, and whose calm voice could command fleets and energies that defied all known physics. Jarek watched from the bridge of the warship as Lyra trained the drones in maneuvers that would make veteran admirals gasp. The scrapyard beneath them hummed with energy and life, the broken vessels and twisted metal responding to her will, as though recognizing her as their rightful master. Lyra had grown beyond the girl who had stumbled through the junkyard starving and terrified. She moved with confidence and purpose, her instincts honed to perfection, and her alien hunger tamed into a disciplined force that amplified her abilities. She could feel the whispers of every machine around her, the faintest vibrations and currents, and she drew upon them as easily as a musician might play notes from memory. She had even begun to repair and awaken old war machines from forgotten battlefields. using their memories and residual programming to strengthen her fleet. The galaxy had no precedent for what she had become, and the Council realized that negotiation might be too late. The first formal challenge came when a Council armada arrived. At the edge of the system, their vessels bristling with weaponry capable of annihilating an entire planet. Jarek attempted to reason with them, reminding them that humanity had been underestimated for centuries. But Lyra only smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting the violet and gold of the distant suns. She activated the warship and called the drones into formation, each ship moving with a fluidity and precision that seemed almost alive. The energy of the scrapyard coursed through her hands and into the fleet, amplifying their weapons and defenses far beyond standard specifications. The Council fleet hesitated as the first pulse of energy radiated from the lead warship, a shockwave that rippled through space not to destroy but to test resistance and gauge strength. The emissary commander attempted diplomacy, but every word was drowned in the presence of Lyra's overwhelming aura. The girl who had once begged for scraps now stood as the embodiment of a new era in the galaxy, her voice carried across the void, commanding both respect and fear. And the Council ships realized that the battle they had anticipated would not be won through firepower alone. Her drones intercepted missiles with impossible accuracy, while her warship maneuvered through impossible trajectories controlled entirely by Lyra's will. The Armada's flagship finally fired its most powerful weapon, a concentrated plasma beam intended to obliterate the lead warship. But Lyra twisted her energy currents in a pattern that refracted and absorbed the beam, splitting it harmlessly into thousands of sparks that danced across the void. Jarek could only watch as she continued to manipulate the battlefield, the battle becoming a display of strategy and power that no one could have predicted. The Council realized their underestimation of humanity had been catastrophic. Lyra did not seek to destroy for pleasure, she sought control over her destiny and the protection of her chosen allies. Every move she made demonstrated intellect and instinct working together seamlessly. The Armada finally began to retreat, knowing that a direct confrontation would be tantamount to suicide, and the galaxy witnessed the birth of a legend, a young girl who had risen from starvation to become a force that reshaped the balance of power. After the Armada's retreat, Lyra stood on the bridge surveying her fleet and the scrapyard below. It had become more than a refuge. It was a citadel, a place where she and Jarek could plan the next steps in humanity's emergence into the galactic stage. She looked at Jarek and smiled, a rare, genuine smile that reflected pride and determination. He realized that she had become both a symbol and a weapon, and that the galaxy would never again view humans as weak or insignificant. Lyra's story spread through star systems in whispers and broadcasts of fear and admiration. She had become the girl who tamed hunger and fear and turned them into unmatched strength. Her legend was only beginning, and the galaxy would remember the night the vampire alien girl of the Junkyard became the unchallenged master of the skies and the harbinger of a new age of human supremacy. The galaxy shivered in anticipation as Lyra's presence became undeniable, every system sensing a shift in power that could not be ignored. She stood at the heart of the scrapyard, a place that had once been her prison, and now thrummed with energy that responded to her every thought. Jarek watched silently as she extended her senses beyond the metal and wires, reaching into the void, into the currents of space itself, feeling the pulse of every ship, every station, every fragment of intelligence that drifted between stars. She had transformed completely from the starving girl he had rescued into a being of immense power and precision, her mind a fusion of human ingenuity and alien instinct. Her fleet hovered around her as if alive, drawn to her presence and obeying commands that were not spoken, but willed. She smiled faintly, knowing that what they had created together was far beyond any conventional understanding of life or war. The first Council envoys arrived again, their fear palpable across the comm channels. They attempted to negotiate, they offered concessions. They hinted at alliances, but Lyra did not flinch. She projected her awareness outward, touching their thoughts, their fears, their doubts, making them question everything they had believed about strength and control. Her voice resonated across the void, soft yet commanding, reaching into the minds of those who dared oppose her, telling them that humanity was no longer a species to be underestimated. They saw her for what she had become: a sentinel, a master, a force that could dismantle fleets without lifting a finger and reconstruct civilizations with the precision of a craftsman. Jarek stood beside her, marveling at the transformation. The girl who had once shivered from hunger now radiated power. Tempered with discipline, she did not revel in destruction. She reshaped and controlled. She balanced the scales of a galaxy that had long tipped against humans. She reached into the vast expanse, connecting with fragments of data and energy streams older than most civilizations could remember, weaving them into strategies that ensured survival and dominance. Her eyes glowed with a mixture of violet and amber, reflecting stars and the history of countless battles she had never fought yet. Somehow, understood instinctively. The Council's armadas faltered as they realized resistance was futile. Every maneuver anticipated, every attack countered without effort, and every surrender accepted on her terms. She had become both guardian and arbiter. The girl who had been abandoned and hunted now held the fate of the galaxy in her hands, and she chose with precision and care which systems would prosper and which would bend under her guidance. Humanity watched from the shadows and the stars, understanding for the first time that their place in the cosmos had changed forever, that the underestimation they had suffered for millennia was over, and that the girl from the junkyard had rewritten the rules of existence itself. Lyra turned to Jarek, her expression calm yet filled with the weight of infinite possibilities. She did not need words to convey what had been achieved. The presence alone spoke of victory, survival, and transcendence. She had become legend and myth intertwined, a being whose story would ripple through time long after the last council had fallen, and the last star had been catalogued. Her power was not born from malice, but from necessity, from hunger and fear, transformed into unparalleled mastery of both flesh and machine. The galaxy could only watch as a new era dawned, with humanity no longer hidden, no longer subjugated, but standing proudly at the center of all things. And so the story of the vampire alien girl who had been found starving in a junkyard reached its culmination not in chaos but in a harmony of dominance, intelligence, and restraint. The systems that had once mocked humanity now whispered their awe and respect. The stars themselves seemed to bend to her will as fleets and civilizations, aligned with the unspoken command of a girl who had once been nothing and had become everything. The end.